I want to now, kind of dovetail this productivity into my next question. And I would like each of you, Merit, Chetna, and Ria, each of you to respond to this, because I think this is an important area which I think all of us would want to know. This is the time when typically, appraisals are kind of completed. There are increments announced. Uh, this is that time of the year, you know. Now, what's happened is that there has been certain restructuring of grants. There has been a postponement of some grants. There is also, the larger issue of diversion of philanthropic capital into COVID-19, which therefore will definitely have an impact on the first thing, which is increments. So promised increments, planned appraisals, performances, if they've been done for the last financial year and executed, great. So my question is actually, there are two questions. One is, what happens to those organizations which actually planned on having an appraisal for the last year, but currently are unable to fulfill the kind of increment? Say, it doesn't matter what the quantum of increment is, whether it's 7%, 7.5 or 10%, but there would have been something planned which may not be possible to execute. That's my first question. And then the second question is, given that the lockdown and post-lockdown also, we know, I'm sorry, but somebody's phone, somebody is not on mute. Could the administrator place them on mute, please? Thank you. The second problem is that, the second question is that with lockdown also being lifted, we do know that programs in their entirety may not be fully possible to be executed because of restrictions of movement. What sort of guideline around, KPIs, organization goals should organizations be therefore considering at this point? So in no particular order, maybe I will request Merit, followed by Ria, and then Chetna to take these two questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Vijaya. So the first question was on appraisals, and so there are, again, it depends on where you are in the year in your appraisal cycle, and I just, for the sake of this conversation, assume that most organizations would have been doing appraisals in the month of March. To that extent, I would say a large part of the year is over. So technically, even often within an organization, when someone is on sick leave, say for a month, we always say that they need to have worked for 9 months of the year, in which case they will be part of the appraisal process. So very similarly, and therefore, if it is possible, I would recommend, therefore, doing that appraisal in this time, if it is practically possible, if we are able to make sure that it's done in a way that is seen fair by everyone. And it's okay, because a large part of the year we have the performance details of employees, and therefore the appraisal can be done. The other reason why I would say again that it can be done is because employees are waiting to also hear about their performance, and therefore it's always better done earlier. In fact, the new way of doing it is not even to wait for it for every year, but do it monthly or quarterly. So to that extent, the answer would be yes. But fundamentally, it needs to be seen as fair. And if for some reason you feel that wouldn't be possible, and therefore you want to move it out maybe by a month or two, then I would say, go ahead and do that. As far as programs not being executed, and do you want to take that as the next question, Vijaya?
Yeah, we could do that. We could do that. So let's also get Chetna's and Ria's thoughts around this.
Okay.
So I have a slightly different approach to this, assuming that we are talking about appraisals leading into a certain amount of increment for the year. And that is depending on the budgeting that has been done. The priority in this situation right now, not just in the nonprofit sector, but in a lot of other organizations, is let's just try giving people their salaries on time. Yes, it will be difficult if an increment doesn't happen, but if that means that potentially, if we don't know when the lockdown would be lifted, and we might need to carry some people through to that time, if we are able to prevent layoffs in the company by deferring increments for a few months and just giving people the base salary, that's also an option to explore right now, because a layoff and cutting staff is a very difficult position to be in for everyone involved, and we still don't know what's going to happen. But we also know that just keeping people on rolls, even with a bare minimum salary, also might help down the line when the restrictions lift and if there is stuff to get back. So obviously, if things have been planned and if budget has been put aside for the increments, it makes sense to go ahead. But if that hasn't happened, because the timing of this whole event has happened right when a lot of companies will probably start planning for it, I would recommend that companies also look into at least trying to pay salaries on time, deferring increments until maybe a little later in the year, and committing to staff and saying, when things pick back up, we can look into doing something like that.
Thank you. Chetna?
Yeah, I have a slightly different take to this. So first is that we should not confuse appraisals with compensation. Appraisals are basically looking at the year gone by, looking at what were the goals and how we have done on those, and then also a feed forward into looking at the next year and what we could achieve. So in my mind, appraisals definitely should happen, because people should know how their performance has been. If it is not happening every quarter or twice a year, at least once in a year, everybody deserves to know. On the compensation front, see, compensation, the situation is very unique. And in fact, if we look at the industry, if we look at all organizations in total, some multinationals which had already finished their appraisal cycles and have done the payouts, people who do it in December have gone about and done it in a regular manner. For most of the Indian organizations for whom we follow the March-April cycle, April to March cycle basically, most of the organizations have deferred it till the lockdown happens. And while that is happening, and we are looking at a lot of salary cuts happening, people are looking at taking salary cuts for themselves, from airlines to ministry, because the idea is to survive and to stay strong. Because crisis provides opportunities where where if you, as an organization, you can survive a crisis like this, you will only emerge stronger. Once you survive, you can build everything again. Okay, so collective pay cuts are what people are looking at, rather than looking at layoffs. But very definitely, if there is a performance issue, if there are, and looking at your own business model and the liquidity that you have, and what is the kind of comp structure that you have, if you feel that there are people who are not able to be able to deliver at this productivity level, which may be heightened due to this situation, then it is better to do a manpower evaluation and mapping according to a revised business model. If we need all the resources and they are good, we keep them and look at salary cuts. And if we need to let go of few, since they aren't that great and they may not be able to deliver to this productivity level that is, then it's better to let the person go and be fair to the others who are going to be there.
Fair point. I I think the other thing which, before we get into the question on how do we set KPIs for this year, I think the key messaging that is definitely coming out is one that separate the appraisal from the compensation conversation. Appraisal is really to, people need to know how they've performed, where they are doing well, what are the areas of improvement, and so on. So that's one aspect to it. And then you have the compensation part. So
Yeah.
I think two things that we're taking away from this is to separate the appraisal and the compensation conversations. Appraisals are essential. They tell staff in terms of how they've performed, what they need to do, where are the areas that, uh, they could do better, what is the progression on the career front looking like within the organization, and role enrichment, role redefinition, and so on. As far as compensation goes, I think I've been also reading some of the remarks being posted by the participants, that payment of salaries at this point is essential based on the liquidity and the assured committed funding that each organization has. They look at what are the kind of salaries that are being paid out. The layoffs and the downsizing is to be considered later, which actually brings me to the next question. Ria, how when we're talking about therefore we're talking about ensuring that teams get their salaries, people get their salaries on time. One is there any sort of a norm, prescribed norm? I mean, and on this call are also certain founders, of organizations. Some of them who work in an honorary capacity. Some who do take a salary. Are there a differential percentage of pay cut which founders are expected to take? And is there some sort of a prescribed norm? I know that in some places there's a 40% pay cut. Again, it varies industry to industry. I don't think there's any sort of comparison to be drawn. But could you kind of start on this? And I would like Chetna and then Merit also to respond.
So I don't think there's any sort of standard norm, and actually founders' pay cuts are primarily driven by the sort of leadership that the management is showing. I mean, you're reading about a lot of people who've foregone an entire month's salary, 100% pay cuts. The standard, what we have been seeing in a lot of places, is around 40 to 50% at the CEO or CXO level, and then going down the ladder up to a 15-20% across the company. Higher or lower than that isn't seen as feasible at the moment, but there is, from my understanding, and I'd be happy to have someone else share their input. From my understanding, there is no norm around something like this. It depends mostly on the kind of business model that the company has. The one thing that a lot of companies are doing are this doesn't really apply for the nonprofit space, but a lot of companies have just said that no bonuses or incentives will be payable this year. That is one way that they have also for people at a senior level, because bonuses incentives form a significant amount of their package. That's one benefit that they have given up. But aside from that, I think anything from a 40 to 50% is standard at the moment for a founder or a senior level cut.
Okay, Chetna?